And welcome, everybody. This is Reagan Archibald, and you're listening to Go Wellness Radio. So happy to have you here today. Just want to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about food allergies versus food sensitivities. We'll go through some of the mechanisms behind that. I'll show you what some of the test results may look like. But then we're also going to dive into some gluten issues. Is gluten really as dangerous as we've thought it was? Maybe not. We'll dive into that. We'll also talk a little bit about dairy. So hopefully today, my goal is to give you a good understanding of what's going on with the foods you eat and how that impacts us. If you listen to our last show, we dove into the microbiome and talked about how bacteria are so influential when it comes to our behavior, our overall health, our genetic expression, all those things. So now let's talk about the food that you eat, because this is going to have a critical impact on your overall digestive health. So before we start, I want to talk about a couple books that I've been reading. I think you're gonna like this one. It's a fun book. It's from the author's name is Jeff Wilzer, and he talks about in the book. It's called "The Good News About What's Bad for You," and then you flip it over onto the other side, and it is called "The Bad News About What's Good for You." And one of the most interesting studies that he had in there that I really appreciated him covering this is he talked about water. And he actually was in the military. He was in the Marines, and one of the in the Marine Corps boot camp, the instructors were always yelling, "Drink more water, drink more water." And he had this picture in his bathroom wall about what his urine should look like, and it was a clear picture with just a tiny trace of yellow in it. And so his entire life he had been, that was the only healthy habit that he thought he was doing, and only he realized that it might be killing him. And some of you may be on the same tread. Let's hope not. But he referenced a study by Dr. Joseph Verbalis, who is the professor of medicine at Georgetown, and he said that you can drink yourself to death, and that's been well documented for over 10 years. So, even if you look at, a competition, he references this competition where you hold your Wii for a Wii, promising the prize of a Nintendo to the person who could chug the most water before peeing. And the woman who won this competition, she drank 6 liters of water, 6 liters of water, and then she held her urine. She felt sick. She went home, and she died. So that's crazy. By the way, I'm not saying don't drink water and dehydrate yourself. That's not it at all. But your kidneys can only excrete about 20 liters of water per day. So if you're drinking too much too fast, your kidneys will fail, and then that's called hypoadrenergia. Hypoatremia, and that is where you get super low levels of sodium, which is an essential electrolyte in your blood, and so you can die from that. So the author also talks about a marathon runner who was also happened to be a fitness instructor. He was 22 years old. He ran the London Marathon. He drank lots of water, and he finished the race, and then he died. And so once again, like, you can overhydrate yourself, because if you lose that essential electrolyte, if you lose sodium and potassium, if you are losing calcium too quickly, your muscles won't work, your heart won't work, and your body will shut down. So anyway, that's an interesting study in there. He's got lots of other ones. He talks about diets, and he actually did this crazy diet where he went on junk food for 30 days. And I'll let you read the book so you can read about that. But he talks about green tea, and there's some interesting things about green tea where the fluoride in green tea can actually have an impact on you. Standing desks, he talks about stretching. He even gets into college degrees and student loans. Some really good information. Diet soda, he unveils the myth on diet soda and how we think diet soda is better for us than regular soda. Hopefully, you as my listeners know that that's absolutely not true, and he talks about that. And then the biggest one, which we're going to talk about today, is he talks about milk, and he talks about this Forbes study, or a headline where it says, "Holy cow! Study suggests milk is bad for bones and heart." Has the medical establishment lied to us? And then he says yes. After 100,000 study tracking 100,000 Swedes for a period of 21 years, researchers found a slightly higher mortality rate for women who guzzled lots of milk. And you know how milk is supposed to strengthen your bones? Maybe not. For women, at least, when they drank more milk, they actually had more hip fractures. And we're actually going to talk about how there's morphine in milk, so it's very hard to to get off milk, especially cheese. So anyway, read that book. The other book I've been reading is called The Stem Cell of Hope, and the author's name is Alice Park. She talks about the National Institutes of Health. She dives into some of the controversy behind stem cells and how the Bush administration, essentially, when the stem cell research was huge in the 90s, and I remember writing research papers on this, the embryonic stem cell debate is pretty well known and recognized. I think all of you can recall that, and it was heated for a time because the government was sponsoring embryonic stem cell research, and a lot of people in the pro-life movement and certain groups of people were very appalled by that because they were promoting pro-life and saying that embryonic research should not be happening because that's a human who has no voice. The proponents of that argument were saying, well, look, these embryos would be discarded and there can be absolutely life-saving treatments that come through stem cells. And so she talks about that, and she sheds light on the pluripotency of stem cells, not just embryonic, but then, one thing in this book, The Stem Cell of Hope, the author talks about, how we're finding stem cells from the chorion layer of the placenta to be pluripotent, just like the embryonic stem cells. And as you probably know, that's the type of stem cells we use in our clinic is the placental derived and the amniotic fluid from healthy pre-screen mothers, all FDA approved. But then those stem cells are, now we're finding that they can regrow ligaments, joints, tendons, even beta cells in your pancreas if you're a diabetic, even new nerve cells if you've got MS. So a lot of cool stuff. So those are a couple books that I've been reading. Both I would highly recommend. But let's jump into today's topic. So first of all, there's a big difference between food allergies and food sensitivities. So you can have adverse reactions to food by, food poisoning. You get some salmonella. You can get very sick, and I think all of us have been there, and we do not want to repeat that. I remember the last time I got food poisoning, I had some sushi that it was too old, but I was super hungry. I knew it was kind of on the fence, and I ate it, and I was incredibly ill for a couple of days. Um, so you can also have these adverse reactions to food that are non-toxic. You can have a severe anaphylactic reaction to like a peanut allergy, and that can create some significant issues. Or you can have just a delayed reaction to food that you may just experience some brain fog, or some issue that shows up maybe not for 48 hours until after you eat the food, so it's a little harder to determine. So, food allergy is going to be a specific immunity. There's going to be a genetic exposure related immediate onset. So, you have a peanut allergy, you eat it, you're going to start swelling up. An intolerance is going to show down the road, and that can be an inflammatory response. We're finding that this can also be what causes leaky gut, which I talked about in the last show. Um, Once again, you're going to have some of the symptoms of an allergy. You're going to have a rash or hives. You can have swelling of your airways, nausea, diarrhea, shortness of breath, chest pain. With the intolerance, you can end up with chronic inflammation, obesity, migraines, skin issues, bloating, IBS, gluten intolerance can actually show up. You can end up with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis specifically, nervousness, ADD. So one of the tests that we do, we can do a blood test through ALCAT, which you can see this chart here, or you can do a test through hair that can show the food sensitivities that you've got multiple ways. None of these tests are 100% accurate. Cyrex Labs actually runs a panel where they will show the cross-contamination, because sometimes you may not react to a certain food. Like you can eat gluten alone and have no reaction to it, but if you have gluten with rice, for example, you can bloat up, you can have all the symptoms. So doing a cross, I believe this panel is called the Array 5, where you can look at some of the cross contaminants, or the Array 20 shows all the foods. Um, some of the most common pro-inflammatory allergenic foods, and these are sensitivities, but these are foods that we've triggered, that we've specifically documented that they can trigger a leaky gut, are gluten, dairy, corn, soy, eggs, and peanuts. And unfortunately with eggs, they're so healthy, but man, every time I do my test, I find out I have egg sensitivities, and it's a bummer because I love eggs, but they give me brain fog. So I would not be able to hold this conversation with you if I ate a bunch of eggs right before I came down into the lab. Um, Okay, so let's dig into gluten. There's a protein called gliadin, and actually there's 14 different types of gliadin. So once again, if you test negative as far as being gluten intolerant, I would not trust it, because a lot of us, at least 30% of the Northern Europeans, carry the HLA DQ8 gene or the DQ2 gene for celiac disease. There's a lot of us that carry the gene. 1 in 100 people have celiac disease. Many of you are not diagnosed with that. Um, Gluten, there's some specific symptoms that you want to look out for. If you may have gluten sensitivity, you could have depression, anxiety, you can be fatigued, you can have bloating, lack of motivation, brain fog, headaches, difficulty losing weight, digestive issues. That's where like bloating and loose stools, or constipation, you can have skin issues, you can be irritable. But gluten it's been in wheat for thousands of years, but we have not been eating grains that long. If you look at our digestive history, we've only been introducing grains for a few thousand years, and the way that our bodies are starting to react to gluten is, what we found is gluten is different, because what's happened is there's a much higher toxin load in it because of the pesticides, and because wheat has been genetically modified to be more hardy. And yes, it saved thousands of people from starvation, but a lot of this genetic modification of our foods is creating reactions in our bodies. So specifically what gluten can do is it can get into those tight junctions, the tight gap junctions in your intestines, and it can seep particles, those proteins, the gliadins, can get into that tissue and cause inflammation, and then that creates this leakiness. and which can cause autoimmune issues, and down the road, if you have intolerance to gluten and you continue eating it, you can start developing celiac disease. So some things we know that gluten does. Gluten, similar to casein, is it does stimulate some of the same receptors. It's got a little bit of morphine in it, so it can definitely affect your ability to get off it. And I think a lot of you, if you try to go off bread, I mean, I've had some of my patients, I think they're going to take a knife out when I tell them maybe they should get off gluten after we've ran their tests. It can be scary, but gluten does cause thyroid dysfunction. It increases free radicals, so you won't detoxify as well. It can attribute to hormonal disorders, infertility, and then it forms neuroactive peptides. They're called gluten exorphins, and even just like sometimes on a gluten-free meal, they will dust a steak, for example. They'll put gluten on it just to change the texture, and that can definitely affect your immune system. It will create this reaction even with just a little croutons on your salad. So you got to be careful. Um, we say, look, in studies when they took a group of patients and they placed them on a gluten-free diet, and then they watched this group versus the people on a standard diet in a blinded fashion. So that means the people who are eating gluten didn't know, and the people who weren't eating gluten didn't know they weren't eating gluten. And so what they found is the gluten-free cohort had less digestive complaints after 6 weeks. So, I don't know about you, but eating a little bit of gluten here and there, I find it does not affect me at all. If I eat it on a regular basis, absolutely. I find a little bit of gluten, that's going to be like maybe if there's some really good smelling bread, I'll have a bite of it. Or if there's some really good dessert, I'm going to eat a little bit of that dessert. But that's it. I'm not going to eat it on a regular basis. Primarily, I get gluten-free everything. So, but for some of you who are experiencing autoimmune diseases, you do need to get off gluten, and you may have to get off it for good, because in our intestines, once you reintroduce that gluten, that can start creating those tight gap junctions to open up, and then you'll get the leaky gut, and that will just keep feeding your autoimmune conditions. So if you have autoimmunity, should you be gluten-free? Absolutely. If everything looks good in all your markers, you've done all the testing for the autoimmune conditions, if that all looks good, great. Maybe eating gluten here and there is going to be okay for you, but in general, stay away from it. Okay, so let's dive into dairy. I mean, dairy, we've always been known. Okay, I'm going to pop quiz you. Milk, it does a body good. That's right. Does it really? There's two types of proteins found in milk, casein and whey. So 38% of the solid matter in milk is the protein. 80% of that's casein. So most of the protein in milk is casein. 20% is whey. Whey can actually heal leaky guts. So whey can be really good. So if you're doing a protein drink, maybe do some whey, do some colostrum. We don't want you doing any soy proteins or any of those other ones. But what we're finding in various studies, when dairy products were removed, cheese was the hardest to give up, because cheese contains more casein than like milk does, or sour cream, or yogurt. So it can be very tough. So a lot of you, if you're going to do any milk at all, it needs to be raw milk. When you pasteurize and homogenize milk, you deplete a lot of those healthy minerals and nutrients in there, especially calcium. Calcium becomes calcium carbonate when it's heated up, and you cannot absorb calcium carbonate. It needs to be calcium bicarbonate, so it needs to be two different, it needs to be ionized calcium. But probably the biggest thing in milk, and I think, I think the biggest thing in milk is that the morphine there makes milk a very addictive substance. And so that's why some of you may need a glass of milk before you go to sleep. And one of my listeners, I'm sure that you're hearing me, but a lot of our kids come in, they are sensitive to dairy products. So once again, as the same with gluten, do the same with casein. Get rid of milk for a while and see how your body reacts to it. So hope this has been helpful. Once again, look at some of these major food sensitivities. I don't want you to go too crazy over this, but I want you to really start looking at what foods are causing inflammation, get the right test done, and let's give you some guidance on what's going to be the best step for you. So appreciate you all for listening and love you, and please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, to listen in. Hopefully they can learn some new things, because our purpose is to help as many people as we can get as healthy as possible. And have a great day.